I'm Matthias Mohr. I'm program director of a place called Radialsystem in Berlin. And I'm very happy to be here in this really wonderful and experimental but very dense and nice, very well organized. I just talked about the food, it's great. Event, which I enjoyed so far very much. I was until lately a dramaturg at the place called Pakt Zollverein nearby, which most of you might know, which is also a place for transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary research. So I'm feeling very much at home here, and thanks for inviting me. Thanks also to Aymar Perez-Gali and also, of course, to Thomas Fuchs for their contributions so far, which were very interesting and dense. And I will now invite in a short while Michael Dittmann, and afterwards we will have immediately a talk with Michael, also with Aymar and with Roman Pfeiffer, who you didn't know so far, a composer for electronic music and also a teacher here at the Folkwang University. Michael Dittmann is a psychologist, a researcher in the field of social psychology at the International Psychoanalytic University in Berlin. And he will do a lecture with the title Rhythm as Fundamental Social Orientation. And as he told me in a pre-talk, his interest in the notion of rhythm is not coming from a, let's say, from a musical point of view, but mostly from a perspective in which he looks at the notion of rhythm in regard to its psychological and communicative aspects. Dittmann will analyze a dance theater piece, especially in this case a short section of a dance theater piece of Pina Bausch, in which the actors relate to each other through a common rhythm and through a communication which is based on this common rhythm. And the question he raises doing so is, how does a dance theater performance contribute to a better understanding of social coordination? So I now welcome Michael Dittmann, thanks a lot, and we will see shortly afterwards, and then we can also immediately go into an open situation of questioning and a talk. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Matthias, for this nice introduction. And yes, I'm very happy to be here, that I was invited to talk to you, and I will present some research I did, as Matthias told you, about Pina Bausch. As I have heard, Pina Bausch is quite known in Essen. There is this teaching school, maybe some people were there, and now you are experts too. Please, I invite you to be very, very detailed in your observations, what I do observe, and where are like convergences and differences of what you see as dancers, and let you as dancers talk, yeah? The discourse is ours, and I want to invite you to contribute to that later. So, in media res, there's one piece of Pina Bausch, it's called Kontakthof, and in this piece, this stage play, there's a small part that got to my attention, and I will show you this small part. Maybe I frame just a little bit, why does a psychologist show interest in stage play? There was a multidisciplinary research group, and in this research group there's Gabriele Brandstetter, and she is a dance scientist in Berlin, and she came to us with this material, and it really got to my attention, and yeah, that's one small piece I will present now. So please let me know if you can hear and see in the everywhere.
Stomach, knee, shoulder, foot, neck, chest,
Head, cheek, neck, chest, head, cheek, neck, head, foot, neck,
cheek, neck, knee, shoulder, foot, chest,
head, cheek, neck, stomach, knee, shoulder, foot, neck, chest,
cheek, neck, knee, foot, shoulder, neck, chest,
head, cheek, neck, stomach, knee, shoulder, foot, neck, chest,
cheek, neck, stomach, knee, shoulder, foot,
cheek, neck, stomach,
head, cheek, neck, stomach, knee, shoulder, foot,
head, cheek, neck, stomach, knee, shoulder, foot,
head, cheek, stomach, shoulder,
head, cheek, neck,
head.
Yes, that was it. And we can see the people behaving towards each other and thereby create a process that creates a kind of flexible order on stage. But this is not formulated in a somewhat pompous way. In the light of the fact that theater artists present a practical play here, they already did some movements, they tried it out, as you might know. So why is this interesting for us and for me as a psychologist? What can a dance play say about processes of social order? Like in a good theater performance, I ask you for a mental detour until hopefully becomes clear what is the researcher trying to tell me. The basic idea is that the way we coordinate with each other when we move in social interactions, that this carries out principles which also apply to the coordination of the participants in this performance when they create this flexible order. I will approach this idea by consulting different methodological perspectives, and I will present them as a cumulative theoretical process. Maybe you could think of a concert, a scientific concert, and there are 5 instruments or voices, and each bring out a silent dimension to sound. First, social psychology. Second, complexity research. Third, cognition. Fourth, neurosciences. And finally, rhythm. Social psychology has provided decisive clues for social processes having situational inferences. In a stage performance, the actors already have a knowledge of the situation. They tested and developed an idea with the help of others, like the director. That emerged to the situation we just saw. This includes rules that stabilize the practiced flexible order together, such as this example, that there are 2 groups, women and men. The groups are engaged in 2 activities. They command or they follow. In a sense of a sociologist, Goffman, these rules are a frame to the expectations that connect them to an action. As observers, we see others performing a practiced stage play, which is new to us in its particular form. So we internally reproduce what is probably being negotiated here. That also draws our attention to the fact that not only persons, but frames and categories are being moved. That these categories seem familiar to us. And so we can conclude that there's not only an individual, but a social dimension of moving. Now, let's have a look again. There's only one short piece. I play it again. Please, just play it again. What I want to illustrate is, there's one command, cheek, and there's one movement, the cheek is moved. In the realization of this short action unit, silent expectations are also moved, which together form an implicit rule. This rule we learn also as observers and in its silent expectation as well as its fulfillment. Feelings are made. From a conversation analytic point of view, we know that coordination of greetings create an action unit, as we know it from greeting and salute in return. When we say hello to someone, we expect to be greeted back, just like in this scene of command and follow. What we can see here as observers, we can notice that the sequential gestalt of commanding and following forms a unit that we can expect, or whose realization deviates from our expectations. We can learn from social psychology that deviations from behavioral expectations display attempts of coordination, thus following implicit rules. To irritate these units of action, our expectations of their cause of realization enables insights into the underlying rule, such as how feelings are made by deviation from this priorly established implicit rule of command and following. So, when the audience reacts with laughter and murmur, and as analysts, we cannot simply attribute personality traits to explain that behavior. This becomes particularly clear in theater. So, situational context frame implicit rules instead of following normative guidelines like the rule to command and to follow. One could say people play with rules in situations. But how these rules are made needs to be examined in greater detail. How can we understand how such transitions of commanding and following are coordinated between the dancers? Does one command always result in one and the same movement? We come to the second voice in the scientific concert, and this is complexity research. To understand how implicit rules are created and how the participants coordinate with each other, I will take a little detour again. Therefore, let's address the second question first. How contingent are the coordinations? Complexity research distinguishes two systems, linear and dynamic. As for example, with a spring pendulum, what you can see happily moving there. The force used to stretch this pendulum or to compress it is proportional to its deflection. So that means the power you have to force this pendulum to go down is exact the same power the pendulum has to go up again. So we can conclude that input is correlating with output. This is completely different in dynamic systems as the actors we have seen. The conditions that precede the same command, which physical movement, for example, was previously performed, does influence the subsequent actions of the group members. The following example will just illustrate that. The same command, cheek, is uttered, and after a few seconds, the following answer will be given. Please pay attention to the person in the blue circle.
Cheek.
I play it again.
Cheek.
And once again.
Cheek.
I hope you can imagine how this person moves. I guess in the back rows it's hard to see. The answer is performed by slightly turning the hips and bending the knees. So though you might not even have seen what I just performed, it's like not the movement of turning a cheek. And now I want to show you a second situation, and please pay attention again to the blue circled man. It's the same man, but later.
Cheek.
This time, the same person turns his head to the left. The group movements are executed individually and not exactly synchronous, which in turn makes the group a living whole. So what we learn here is that the individual performances of the participants do not simply add up to a predictable result. Rather, input is unequal to output. This seems banal, but it is important for answering the question how speaker changes are coordinated. We are approaching an answer, and we have answered the second question. And this is exactly what can be astonishing, that several people who do not always act synchronously or contingent, that we can perceive them as a group by not being perfectly synchronized. But if speech inputs do not lead to an immediate and regular output, how do these two groups coordinate their joint action? Do you remember the beginning of the clip? I added a 2/4 beat and the waveform to the audio track. Here comes the video with some illustrations. In the waveform shown below, you can see at the top the time axis in seconds, and left the volume, the vertical lines are the beats of the metronome on every second. And the circles mark when a command is spoken. What is being revealed is that the 2/4 timing of the commands, where we can see the waveform, the inner clock of the speaker is precise, and only the second and the fourth beat is delayed by a few tenth seconds. You see this deviation between this line and this kind of a bulb, and here again. This is how precise they perform their commands, as if they had these inner clock, these metronome inside. Even if we as observers do not dance to the well-timed commands like the actors do, we prepare ourselves mentally and we form expectations to micro-events. They develop over time. In this respect, musicality has to do with beat or with timing. The way in which we can hear something creates expectations for further events. A working group around the musician and brain researcher Peter Wust called this predictive coding. According to this model, we make prediction about which sensory stimuli will be applied to us in the coming moments. Neuronal oscillations play an important role in this. But more important, and my point here is that the anticipation is the kind of neurological baseline or prerequisite for the ability that we can coordinate with each other in time. Now we have the methodological skill to answer the first question, how to coordinate the transitions of turn-taking. This is the continuation of the established 2/4 beat. Please pay attention to the steps of the man's group and their fit to the metronome beat. At the beginning of the clip you might see it. Somebody observed something with the steps of the male leader of the left positioned group? Did it fit to the metronome, and when? It's like the second step of the leader that always fits to the second pulse of the metronome. So what he is doing, he commands, and he has this, what you could call the inner clock, and he embodies this time aspect by commanding when touching the floor. So, back to the musical dimension. In the waveform, the establishment of this beat can be seen in the blue circles. We've already seen that. The sixth command, the first red circle, the tempo, what becomes visible by the red arrows or the deviation from the 2/4 time. So a new beat is established, whereby this is about 1.5 beats apart of the rhythm that has been, or the beat that has been established before. Before a new increase in tempo is achieved, the woman's group speaker reacts to that change by talking over and taking the turn herself. We see that here the first time the woman's group takes over the command. And my question again is, how is this possible? It's possible by signaling this is a new rhythm, and 3 pulses signal the other seems to be, hey, here's a new rhythm, you might take over now. And this is exactly what happens here. Why is this interesting at all? Well, the room is metaphorically spoken, contracting in several ways. The group come closer physically. The step length is reduced. At ever shorter intervals, commands are uttered. They get faster and faster. And all that is perceptible by us. This is what Goffman called mutual monitoring, that persons must sense that they are close enough to be received in whatever they are doing, including their experience of others, and close enough to be perceived in this sensing of being perceived. Well, interaction, that is something we can learn from that, needs joint attention and the perception for the design of the utterances. Not only contextual aspects, but also the way of talking, as well as the silent resonance dimension that my mind is with you and I am with you while you're talking. This not only holds for mutual coordination of the actors, but also for us as observers. We can now specify the social psychological perspective that situational influences can be found especially in the rhythmic musical dimension. Rhythm needs some kind, the analysis of interaction needs some kind of new attitude, and this is some kind of aesthetic idea that rhythm can be understood as a frame for the organization of meaning with respect to the expected events in time. So the rhythm we have seen that has been established before is something like a behavioral frame for the actors, and they can behave towards that. From the opening of the video to the first turn taking, which I have shown you in detail so far, not even 30 seconds elapse. This is an overview of the section of the command scene, which I created with the audio editing program Audacity. The total running time of the clip is a bit over a minute, what you can see at the top, where the time is indicated. And on the left side, you see tempo in beats per minute, short BPM. From slow at the bottom, there's 30 BPM, and fast on the top, it's 130 BPM. Above the time axis, speakers are coded, taking up the stage place way, displaying a sex status. Blue stands for the men's group and rosé for the women's group. Aha, did he do that intentionally? Please remember that. I will pick that up in the end. I hope you can listen to me anymore. So, in conjunction with the bars for tempo, there's a connection visible now between the speakers and the speaker transitions. Following the idea of this connections, I segmented the section into 3 parts. First, the prelude, which reaches until 72 BPM, what is approximately the average human heartbeat or heart rate. Okay, I'll show you again what's the segment of the prelude. Well, there's a first, what I will call rhythmic constriction. This is made relevant by speeding up the previous beat. The women's group takes over the commands and increases the rhythmic density to a fourth beat at 50 BPM. This tempo induced the transition between the different rhythmic densities. We can also observe after the second rhythmic constriction. Now we can understand the coordination of the participants as an interactive tuning of tempo over the course of time, which is expressed in rhythmic density. The musicologist and psychologist Satinder Gill describes this form of narrowing of mutual attention as entrainment. She says, entrainment denotes how we mutually adapt to each other's rhythmic beat. Entrainment in that category is understandable, please excuse me, is understandable as a balanced oscillation of several modal impulses, so that ambiguities are balanced in favor of a common rhythm, which is good enough to be perceived as coherent. This could explain that this stage play's rhythm is a joint co-creation which serves as a template for the following statements in time and leading expectations until being expressed as a common rhythm. The second phase, the climax, becomes up to 130 BPM fast. That we know from disco music. First, as in the prelude, but even faster, beats per minute increase at the first 2 and at the 4th speaker change. At the 3rd and the 5th speaker change, the others continue the interactional rhythm. We see that here. Here's a speaker change where also that goes along with the rhythmical change, but here and here not. They stay in a common rhythm. That's all in that what I segmented as climax. And this is amazing. It's amazing that they produce their commands and their reactions in the same speed, in the same tempo. How is that possible? It's only possible with that, let's say, musical history. And Peter Auer and colleagues comment on the quiet tension between interaction on the one hand and individual on the other hand, as interactional rhythm requires a common clock to be functional in the conduct of conversation. That is what I tried to show you before when we saw the male leader performing that steps according to the commands. And that can be surprising, how from this symphony of balanced tempo, a rhythmic co-construction can emerge. Anyway, these finely tuned utterances and movements contribute significantly to the flow of this dance performance. At the end of the climax is indicated by a silence, marking the transition to a new rhythm. At the so-called conclusion, the tempo and the number of beats drops to 30 BPM. We have a look.
Cheek, stomach, shoulder,
head, feet, leg,
hands.
In the last part of the common rhythm of speech dissolves this common rhythm previously is established, then becoming faster and faster in an ever shorter interval, culminating in a common climax process, and finally dissolving, mutually coordinated with a common groaner. This is what I call a common groaner, because they end up this scene together. This brings us to the end of this presentation. But before I will close my presentation, in accordance with the term used in music, here's the coda that picks up and summarizes the characteristic traits of the whole work. Okay, let's have a look. Not only for psychoanalytic ears, I would now like to explicate the connotation of climax and moaning to a picture that is almost intrusive here. The time relations during sexual intercourse are comparable with the time conditions in this example. One could describe the compressed speech to the climax as increasing breathlessness, as it is associated with sexual intercourse. Accordingly, the climax would be a climax process, not a climax point, as some males might see it. And yet another aspect, everything is about sex, except sex. Sex is about power. That's what Selig says. And the dance theater, as a puppet theater, draws attention to the educational aspects. In gender processes, remember my coding of the speakers, please, we are, that's my argument, steered somehow, gesteuert auf Deutsch. As you might remember, the colors of the speakers. Okay, what does the time schedule say? It's okay? It's okay, so I go on. Okay, thank you very much. There's one idea. I will summarize the 5 dimensions. They're of course not, I don't claim to have a complete list here, but it's intended to illustrate the epistemological problem of what is called the small social phenomena, after which visibility is sometimes wrongly associated with irrelevance and unimportance, as Jörg Bergmann says it. In his article From Interplay to Interaction, Bergmann cites the early 20th century Berlin philosopher Georg Simmel, who writes in his studies on socialization, but in addition to those phenomena which are visible from afar and which impose their extent and external appearance everywhere, there exists an immeasurable number of less conscious forms of relationships and kinds of interaction. Taken singly, they appear negligible, but they alone produce society as we know it. And the cumulative theoretical changing perspective might be helpful to gain new insight how the mind and the body are intertwined. So in rhythm, prior atomized forms of interaction refer to each other again. Thank you very much for your attention.